are. We're outside Jerusalem. It's right in here, around, oh, I've got to find it, Bethphage and Bethany. And then the Mount, it doesn't show the Mount Olives on here, but that's right in there. It was east, on the eastern slopes. There, and that's the location where this began. Of course, Bethany and Bethphage was close to Jerusalem, and Bethany was used a lot for the overflow when they had the Passover for people to stay. People don't open their homes and have people stay. And so, and Bethany and Bethphage was very close to Jerusalem, because we know from Jewish law the Bethphage was one of the circle of villages which marked the limit of a Sabbath day journey. Evidently you were limited to travel so far on the Sabbath day. And so that is less than a mile. Okay, we'll start with the lesson on page 48, Hosanna. And our purpose today, we'll try to get this, to consider what or whom elicits our extravagant praise and why. So, let's begin. There were some other things that I wanted to talk to you about. Although the things, Jesus' ministry was very important, that was not the most important thing. This becomes the most important thing, of course, we know, in Jesus' life. And but here are some of the most important events that immediately preceded Jesus' entry into Jerusalem. As you remember, I guess I taught the Transfiguration, and the disciples were very confused and wondering when Jesus kept talking about this king and this Messiah and what he was going to do. They were rather confused, and still they have not come to light as to what is going to happen. And then following the Transfiguration, presumably because of the event, Jesus began moving to Galilee, to Jerusalem. It is unclear how long the usual 3-day journey of approximately 75 miles took Jesus and his disciples. On the way to Jerusalem, the crowds that once thronged around Jesus, think especially of the feeding of the 5,000, they thinned and they dwindled, and they were really just replaced by individuals. And then miracles ceased, and the teaching of the large crowd stopped. They were replaced by difficult decisions about discipleship and conversations about the cross with his closest followers. And we must keep in mind that about the same time that Jesus was entering Jerusalem, Pilate and a legion of Roman troops were entering Jerusalem from the west, and which they did, during the Passover. I'll just skip over here and read to you about, because of the very large crowd that swelled the population of the holy city of Passover, as well as religious anticipation in accompanying the festival, Pilate and the Roman procurators were careful to garrison additional troops during the festival. Their presence was a show of force, a very visible reminder to the Jews that their freedom to worship as they pleased was imperiled extension of grace and not to be taken lightly. So they always had their eye on them, nor would any attempt to take advantage of it be tolerated. Jesus timed his arrival to coincide with the arrival of the Jewish Passover, as we know, and probably as you heard in the lesson this morning in church. At the time of the Passover, it was one of the 3 annual events, and the other 2 being Pentecost and the Booths, during which the Jews were encouraged and expected to travel to Jerusalem to celebrate. So, with that kind of a background, one other thing. Some interpreters feel that the story of Bartimaeus, the blind man, that he was healed, think that Mark has placed the healing of the blind man as the final event in Jesus' ministry outside Jerusalem to show that the disciples would eventually be healed of their spiritual blindness. And we talked about that in the Transfiguration. Now, I had not heard of that. Had you heard of that? No. I hadn't either. But it's because Bartimaeus exhibits the type of faith that forms the basis for healing. He also cries out the truth that Jesus is a merciful Son of God and the crowds cannot silence him, as you recall. And they could not silence him. We Christians through the centuries have repeated a variant of Bartimaeus' cry for mercy. When do we use that? Especially in a petition for prayer. What do we say? Have mercy. Have
Lord,
mercy.
have mercy.
Yeah. Lord, in your mercy, or have mercy. And so that's evidently where that comes from. You find all these things as you go on. Anyway, now it's time to turn to our books and read the scripture on page 48. You give me a little break. I'm going to ask somebody to read the first 6 chapters.
6 chapters?
I mean, as you can see, I get all shook up here. I'll get all ahead of myself. Okay.
That would give you a big break.
Yeah.
When they were approaching Jerusalem, near Bethphage and Bethany, near the Mount of Olives, he sent 2 of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the village ahead of you, and immediately as you enter it, you will find tied there a colt that has never been ridden. Untie it and bring it. If anyone says to you, 'Why are you doing this?' just say this, 'The Lord needs it and will send it back here immediately.'" They went away and found a colt tied near a door outside in the street. As they were untying it, some of the bystanders said to them, "What are you doing untying the colt?" They told them what Jesus had said, and they allowed them to take it.
Okay. Anybody have any comments from your message this morning before I go into...
Yes, where did the colt come from? Always
Okay.
heard donkey. And in church service this morning, they said donkey and colt from Matthew. That's getting me confused.
Now, is it Matthew in one place? It says, I think it's Matthew, if I get these right now in my head, because I read them all. I went through them all. One has a donkey and a colt. Of course,
Yes,
it would be the colt.
that's Matthew.
And that's Matthew. Okay. One just says they went to get a colt. And I think that's Luke. And John says just this. And Jesus found a donkey. So, and if anybody wants to get a Bible and go over those, boy, you could do that.
It's probably a translation error, let's call it.
Well, it can be.
Yeah, or not error so much as...
Because as I get into this, some of these things are, translate Hebrew to Greek, and it's kind of changed them.